This is Uncommonly Remarkable, where we discuss the surprising everyday lives and notable accomplishments of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday folks like you and me. My name is Artis Beatty. I am a doctor of optometry and the chief medical officer for My Eye Doctor OD. Though we will inevitably touch on topics within my area of expertise, the opinions and the conversations held here are separate from my work with My Eye Doctor. Today's guest describes himself as an outdoor enthusiast, a sports nut, and a bibliophile. Jonathan Woody, or Woody as the world knows him, currently manages the budget and staffing within UNC Chapel Hill's history department, but has done so many other things that it's staggering. From being an amateur bull rider in rodeos during his 20s to starting a nonprofit ministry in East Africa, he's spent time defining and then redefining himself as he's gone through life. After earning a bachelor's in economics, he earned a master's in theology, and then humanities, and then public school administration. He's gone from educator to pastor and back again as a principal. He loves bourbon, cigars, and above all else, reading. And in fact, he's a growing celebrity on Instagram where his love of books has actually earned him some recognition, some famous followers, and according to him, the ultimate prize, free books. Ladies, gentlemen, all you remarkable people, please help me welcome Jonathan Woody to the show. Woody, it is exciting to have you here on the podcast today. I can't believe that you took the time to come and sit with me, but thank you so very much.
I can't believe you want to talk to me.
I get that quite a bit. People tell me, I don't know, I don't think I'm interesting. I don't know that I have anything exciting to say. I am now thoroughly convinced that everybody has an interesting story. There are things about our everyday, ordinary lives that are ordinary to us, but fascinating to other people. And so we're going to figure that piece out. We're going to talk about it. But in your case, there are so many pieces of your life. We'll call them chapters since you are very into reading. And those chapters, I think, are interesting as individual chapters, but when you look at it across the whole book, I think it's really, really a cool story.
Sounds like you've read me already. That's wonderful.
The full disclosure, I've known you for quite a while, and we've gotten to know each other over the years through my brothers.
Yep.
And so I have an advantage of knowing bits and pieces of the story, and you're going to help me put it all together.
Let's do it.
Oh, cool. Full disclosure for everybody who listens, in my very first podcast, I talked about the fact that I have a couple dogs. One of those dogs has since passed away, but London, the younger of the two dogs, is a barker and a snorer, and she happens to be in the studio with us today. So we're going to see how well behaved she is, but we'll apologize in advance if we get a little growling or squeaking of her pet llama as she's sitting on the floor listening to us have this conversation. I don't know exactly where I want to begin, but maybe we'll start with where you are today, and we'll do a little bit of that backwards, forwards kind of stuff.
All right.
Okay. So you have had several pieces of your career over time, but today you are working at University of North Carolina.
I am.
Which is kind of a big deal.
It is. Because I'm a dookie.
Yeah. So tell me about that. Tell me what you're doing now and how you ended up in the history department.
So I've been there for a year last month. And kind of got there by accident. A dear friend of mine, Miguel, is the chair of the history department. I once worked with his wife at Carver Elementary School. She and I were the admin team for the school. So I've known him for 16, 17, 18 years. And we have dinner with him pretty regularly. So we were at Death and Taxes one night, and he said, hey, if you happen to know anyone who's looking for a different job, specifically someone who was like a school principal or an assistant principal who was looking to get out of public K-12 education. And I thought, I know a couple people, but I might be interested. And we just spent the rest of the evening drinking bourbon and talking about the possibilities. And interviewed, fell in love with the idea of it. I think my biggest obstacle was leaving K-12 education administration. I felt like I was abandoning kids. And my husband saw that through the pandemic, in the 2 years after the pandemic, I began exhibiting stress coming home from work that I had never experienced before, nor had he ever noticed before. And he kind of gave me permission to move on to the next chapter, and I don't know that I would have had he not encouraged me. So I manage the budget for the history department. I'm the finance manager there. I have 6 staff. We have about 60 professors. I set up their promotions. I set up the hiring. I work with the dean's office to create hiring packages for new professors, and don't deal a lot with undergrads or grad students, but my day-to-day work with the budget certainly impacts them. And I'm no longer chasing kids. I'm no longer on the playground, and it's nice.
Well, let's talk about that just a little bit, though, because it's a different way to be involved still in education, but your background is not really around finance and I guess therefore budget management. So
No.
how are we bridging those two? Like, what was, I guess, the hook that got you thinking about this, and then why was it they were looking for someone who had been in public education administration?
So my undergraduate degree many years ago was in economics. And so I briefly, when I graduated, I did some accounting-based, finance-based stuff. Hated it back then. Absolutely hated it. I remember telling my parents I felt like it robbed my soul of joy. And of course, they thought I was being dramatic, but I didn't like it. Fast forward to last year, it became interesting to me. And it's interesting. The older I get, the more I love puzzles. I love Rubik's Cubes. I love things like that. And so my brain, I think, is evolving a little bit as I'm getting older. And I now find managing this enormous budget that the state gives me and lets me manipulate. Like, it's crazy they let me do that. I find it's engaging, and I love finding creative ways. It's just like a Rubik's Cube, or a Sudoku, and finding ways to make all the pieces fit where they're supposed to fit. And unlike a Rubik's Cube, all the pieces don't have to fit perfectly every time for the budget to be effective, and so I've enjoyed that piece. It's certainly engaged my mind in a way that probably the last 5 years in K-12 education did not.
Then let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned you're a Duke fan when we started, and you come by that honestly.
I do.
Interestingly, when you look at just by sheer volume of people that graduate from programs, right, it is more likely that if you meet a Carolina fan that they have some tie or they have gone to Carolina just because of history and volume versus Duke fans where the most Duke fans you meet don't really have a tie back to the school, but they like the school.
Yeah.
You actually have a tie back to the school, which is interesting because now you've got ties to rival schools, which doesn't happen all the time. And my first podcast guest, Lenny Friedman, is like that too. He's got ties on both sides. And so it's interesting that both of you really are still Duke fans, even though you have that Carolina tie.
Yeah, I've got a grad degree from Duke and a grad degree from Carolina. And I joked about the Carolina one because we met off campus. So I never actually had to get anywhere on campus. And lo and behold, here I am working in Hamilton Hall at UNC.
Wow. Your education piece, I think, is really interesting because we've alluded to you being involved in K through 12 education. We're going to talk about that just a little bit, but you have had a variety of subject matters that you've studied extensively, and they are not necessarily, I should say they're not readily related, but they are interestingly intertwined. So you have a degree in economics. That was the bachelor's that we talked about, but you have a master's in theology. And then a master's in humanities. And then in public school administration.
Correct. Could I pick more random things?
So I'm going to get you to tie some of those things together and tell me a little bit about the educational journey. Why were you here versus there? How did you start with theology and then all the things that kind of happened with theology and afterwards?
All right. So I would say after After college, like I mentioned earlier, I did some finance type stuff and really did not like it. Ended up working at a landscaping company, made a good friend. We ended up starting a nonprofit in Africa, and it was a ministry, and loved doing that. Did that for a number of years. That led me to Southeastern Seminary, where I did my MDiv program. And at that point in my life, I was very, very conservative Christian and 100% into it. And that work in East Africa actually led me into education, K-12 education. And so things may seem disparate in some way, but they're all kind of paths are leading to each other. I think the universe kind of works that way. Yeah, so my experience, the very first time I went to East Africa was on the coast of Kenya in a town, probably a village, about 30 miles outside of Mombasa. And Mud Hut Village, kind of what you would expect, what most people think parts of Africa looks like. And it's certainly what I envisioned. And the kids would have nothing to do with me. They were scared. Most of the kids in that particular village had not seen a white man. Mm-hmm. And if they had, it was very rare that they had. But what I was blown away by with those kids, I spent a summer there the first time, and they lived in a mud hut, slept on a floor. They walked 2 miles to school. You know, they were not like the kids, even my own nieces and nephews. They were not like them at all. They seemed so much more industrious, so much more empathetic, so much more creative. I went there thinking, what can I do and what can I give to these poor people? And lo and behold, they're the ones who kind of changed my life. You know, they made my world much bigger, and all of the stereotypes, the perspectives that I had of what I would experience in a place like that were really just kind of thrown out the window pretty quickly.
So you're there and you're absorbing, you're learning more than you're teaching.
For sure.
But that somehow sparked the I want to do more work with children?
Absolutely. So I left there and came back to the States and started at Southeastern Seminary and ended up getting a TA position, a teacher's assistant position at an elementary school in Wake Forest, just to see if I liked it. I liked it a lot. Did that for a year, and then I was hired for a private school, an independent school, and I taught there for, I think, 6 or 7 years, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And it was a perfect spot for me then, for who I was then. Mm-hmm. I would definitely not have been able to stay in that position as I became much more authentically myself.
So was the nonprofit, was it focused on religious ministry for
100%?
100%. Yeah. Okay. And so you were teaching the Christian Bible for these students in East Africa. Okay.
We were, yep.
And at the same time, you were thinking, how do I do more of this in the U.S.? And okay, now I see. And so when you're deciding, I guess, that you're going to teach based on religion, you had a fairly religious background or upbringing, right? Did that play a role in the decision?
Absolutely. I could not have grown up in a more conservative Southern Baptist family. I mean, it wasn't picketing on the side of the street type. You know, it was just Southern Baptist. We pray at dinners and we're at church every time the doors are open kind of family. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's what I grew up in. And on top of that, my dad was a mortician. And in small towns, funeral directors are basically pastors. You know, they're viewed as such. And so my brother and I lived a pretty conservative life. We were not allowed to misbehave or do anything. You know, it was a reflection on the business and my parents.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think people respect morticians in that they become counselors, right? Because they are speaking with people in a time when they're most vulnerable, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And they are perceived to have had experience with this particular lifetime event over and over again. And so
Yeah.
people actually look to them for, how do I handle it? What does this mean? Can you
Yeah.
help me through? So I can definitely see that. What was it like, though, growing up with your dad and his occupation, dealing with all of the other people in the town, kids around? Like, what was that like?
Well, as a kid, it was fun because everybody wanted to come to the funeral home and play hide and seek. And in college, friends would come home with me for break or something, and we would lay in caskets and take pictures and all crazy
What?
stuff. Yeah,
Really?
yeah. I mean, I think that was just kind of normal, and it's kind of weird now for me to look back on that, but and it's funny. I mean, over the years, I've met other people who grew up in funeral homes or funeral director families, and they all did the same things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's certainly a culture within the funeral business to have done that.
In talking to people, do you think it's changed, or you have a different way of thinking about life and death versus a person who didn't have an experience where they were basically, I guess, surrounded by death quite a bit?
Oh, absolutely. My brother and I realized our parents passed away about 6 years ago, 2016. Yeah, a little bit longer than 6 years. And my husband and my brother's wife fully expected my brother and I to be so much more upset than we were. And we grieved. Of course we grieved. And that's when my brother and I kind of realized that we have a very different view of death than most people. And it's got to be because of the way we were raised. It was unsettling for us to realize that because it kind of made us feel like something was broken. But clearly there was nothing broken. We saw it all the time. And even when it's your own family member, you kind of learn to divorce it a little bit. And I think actually it probably helped us learn to process death in a more effective, efficient way.
I would imagine that would be the case. And I would be interested in learning about or seeing or reading studies around or interviews around people who have had multiple exposures to death versus people who have no exposure, and how the grieving process or how they think about what's going on, because it has to be markedly different, because it's like that for almost everything right now. Life and death are generally we consider to be the paramount things, right? But you could take anything that your family did, and people who grew up with it look at it differently than people who are exposed to it later. Right.
For sure.
So it could be that that dad was a miner, or dad was a mechanic. In my case, dad was a butcher. And so I probably look at cuts of meat differently than people who did not have a butcher as a parent. And so it's just interesting that in your case, it was someone who was dealing with helping people go through the death process and the aftermath of the death process. And so it's changed the way, or gave you a different perspective than it would have been otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that 100%. I think it made me realize that, like, I was a former pastor, pastors who do tons of marriages over 30 years, they officiate. I know they begin to see it a little bit different each time, and it's not as overwhelmingly beautiful and joyful. It becomes a job, and so I think that's normal.
Talk about being a pastor a little bit.
Wow. I'm glad I'm no longer a pastor.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll start off with that. My heart as a kid was genuinely interested in spirituality, specifically Christianity, and it came from a pure place, and I wanted to be able to share that with people. And the only mechanism I knew was to become a pastor to do that. And I obviously realize now that it's much more about how you love and how you give back to people, and much less about the words that you say. But growing up in small town North Carolina, Southern Baptist Church, it was bestowed upon me and ascribed to me to become this pastor. And it's the path I started walking down. And I genuinely wanted it at the time, for sure. Life turned out differently, and that's okay. I'm happier.
How long were you a minister or pastor?
So I was in seminary, I'd probably say from 24 years old, 25, up until about 30.
Okay.
Not
Okay.
long,
hmm So now you're going to have to help me with the
of
timeline
course.
because you were in your early 20s, so post undergraduate when you were working in East Africa.
Yep.
Then you were back and in seminary and
Teaching.
pastoral. You were teaching,
Yeah.
and then you became a pastor after the teaching.
I did. It was, I was bivocational, I guess you'd say.
Okay.
I never had my own church.
Okay.
And I didn't really want that. I wanted to be able to move around and work with youth groups and things like that. So I was ordained, but I never had my own church. And I did serve as a youth pastor for one church for about a year. It was restrictive, I would say that. And so I slowly began pulling myself out of that world. Took a while.
You did rodeo stuff.
I did.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out where in there the timing was for Rodeo Woody.
All right. So my grandpa and my stepdad who raised me. When I say my dad, it's my stepfather. He owned horses. My grandpa owned horses. So I was around rodeo growing up. I kind of really fell in love with it probably in my early 20s. I fell in love with the idea of becoming a bull rider. And I watched a lot of professional bull riding. Whenever they'd come to town, I'd go see them. They had this thing called Cowboy Church on Saturdays where you could meet all the bull riders. And I just fell in love with it and said, I want to try that. And I tried it I think I was 23, 24, and really liked it. Massive rush of adrenaline. And I've never been like a risk taker, but I loved it. But I also know now as a 54-year-old man, part of the reason that I jumped in so heavily into that is I was trying to prove something. I was trying to prove my worthiness as a man, trying to prove that these feelings that I was having, same-sex feelings, this would help me push those further down because I was doing manly things.
I see.
And I don't want to say that was the only reason I did it, but I certainly had a part for sure. I was of the mindset, I need to emulate. In order for me to become what I want to be, I need to be around people who are like that.
I see. Okay.
And I deeply wanted to be this super masculine, godly man. And naively, I thought that's how I would achieve that.
So how long were you in the rodeo? Yeah.
I definitely stopped riding in around 28, 29.
That's a long time.
It's too old. Yeah, it's too old.
That's a long time.
I only got injured really one time. I broke a bunch of fingers at one time. And I rode in several places in the country, but it was not an earn a living type of thing. I mean, it was just small town rodeos. And I did ride in Houston one time and never won any money. Always got beat by 14-year-olds, but I did get a couple cool belt buckles and I did have a couple 8-second rides, but it wasn't about that for me. It was about, one, it was a way to identify with my grandpa and my dad and made me feel like I was becoming a man. Very naive to say that, but it was.
Well, but it's not. It's interesting for me because now in my conversations with people, there are so many conversations where life events and choices are related to that perceived notion of trying to establish masculinity.
For sure.
And I had a great conversation, which you haven't heard yet, but by the time this is released, will have been in the catalog of conversations. But it was with a gentleman named George, who is a PhD student in the UK, and he is studying eating disorders in men. specifically eating disorders, body dysmorphia, muscle dysmorphia, and related topics in men, because there has not been nearly the same level of research for how these things develop and affect men as there have been for women. And he himself had an eating disorder and was dysmorphic, and he recounts a story of searching for masculinity. And so, his dad was a rugby player. So he was a rugby player, and he got injured, and he gained a lot of weight. But then when he started to lose weight again, people cheered him on, and he felt like he was being accepted. And anyway, I say that because what you describe in your rodeo time is not dissimilar. And there have been several people who've sat in that seat that you're sitting in now to have conversations. And now that I know what I know from multiple conversations and looking back, they were also describing periods in their journey to adulthood that were established based on that sense. And so it's very interesting to just hear, because it's a theme, and it has to be part of the grow up that everybody goes through, and looking at what we would say are the established norms and figuring out how we conform or at least fit close to those established norms.
Sure. And the irony, was lost on me at the time. I grew up playing tons of sports, played high school, college, very athletic. I was always had some type of football, basketball, soccer, something
You're
in my...
one of those people.
Always had something going on, So the irony was that I did not view that as an innately masculine thing. And nor does it really have to be, because I love women's sports, and it was lost on me. I think when you grow up, my experience, when growing up in the South, in the Southern Baptist Church, there's really two paths, in my view, a guy could go, a young man could go. You become this sweet, docile Southern Baptist, yes ma'am, yes sir, bend over backwards to make sure everybody's happy, or you can become super aggressive type A, stand up on the corner, wave your Bible up and preach and tell everybody they're going to hell and, point out their sin. I chose the first way.
Yeah.
And I was a sweet child. I was a gentle child. I was docile. I was loving. And all those are great things, But for me, being that was natural, but it was also what I thought I was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Because that's what a good Christian boy does. You don't talk back. You don't voice your opinion. You don't voice hey, that's not working for me. You don't do that, And I didn't learn to speak up really for myself until my 40s, And it wasn't a matter of not having that voice. It was there. I always put myself after other people's needs. To a fault, for sure. Nothing wrong with being kind. I love that. I love kindness. But I would choose to put other people's needs before my own. And that became what I was taught to do. And it's interesting that I did that, but I don't regret it, for sure. It kept me out of a lot of bad stuff.
Well, that could be true. But then how did you make the transition between or from, I am a pastor, I'm in seminary, I'm done with seminary, have been raised as a Baptist. I'm not quite sure if that's the path that I want. It's definitely not the path that I want. I'm leaving this. Like, how did you make that transition, and what happened?
So I came out twice.
Okay.
Everybody has a coming out story. Mine, I have two. The first time I came out right after college, and it really, my parents were stunned. I don't know how they could have been stunned, but they were stunned. They put me into Christian counseling, and I genuinely didn't want to be gay. I thought it was a sin. I thought God could change me. And then I went down that path up until 36 years old. I worked with in Exodus International. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that organization. It's disbanded now because it's horrible. It was horrible to people. And did some conversion therapy camps. And so from like 25 to 36, I was celibate. and all of my friends in the singles ministry at my church where I was going, Southern Baptist Church here in Raleigh, they were all having sex. I was not, and I was just waiting desperately for God to heal me, to get rid of these desires. And it clearly didn't happen, and I'm thankful that it didn't happen, but seeing that dichotomous life, that I knew men who were married with 3 kids and they struggled with same-sex attraction, and they would occasionally play around on the side, and their wives and kids never knew. They would ask forgiveness from this Bible study that I was in, an ex-gay Bible study. And then here I am, completely celibate, frustrated as hell, in my 20s, trying to figure out why in the world I was given this pill to swallow, And I began to realize I can't continue being celibate, but I also didn't want to live the life that a lot of these men that I admired were living, very duplicitous life. And it kind of seemed that's what I was going to have to become. And it just took me about from 30 to 36 to finally come to grips with that reality and decide that, you know what, I'm going to abandon the whole God thing. Just going to leave it all behind so that I can come out and become a gay man.
And you felt you had to divorce the religion to be able to do that?
I did, for sure.
Okay. That's an interesting point, because some people figure out how to put the religious aspect into a box and they continue to carry the faith base, right? But they then understand that they are going to live the life that makes most sense for them to live, and they don't split, right?
Of course.
And there are other people who do say, I can't reconcile what's happening on the left to live what's on the right. And so for whatever period of time, I'm going to turn that left off so that I can actually live the life on the right.
Yeah. My worldview up until that point was very theologically conservative. So I did not know at the time that there were other interpretations of Scripture. I didn't know that there were other ways of viewing faith in the Bible. And I just didn't know. I was naive. I didn't know that existed until after I came out. And I discovered an entire world of men and women and the whole gamut of gender who love God in their own individual ways. And I'm still learning that. And I'm okay learning that.
And so then you went from being a pastor to going back to doing more education-based things.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
And so that was it feels like education was a passion from start, right? Something that you were really interested in.
For sure.
You were looking for a way to do that with the religious base that you were very familiar with and held in very important or high regard.
Yeah.
When you then have the thought that I can't do this piece anymore, you still held on to the original thing, which was really, it was helping and teaching children. Yeah.
When I left Christian education, I became a 7th grade teacher at a private school in Durham, and very progressive school, beautiful school, very project-based learning, incredible experience being there. Those kids did not care that I was gay. I'd never met kids like that. They were just cool. They're like, oh, you're gay? Okay, what's your boyfriend do? And they didn't care at all. And that was a paradigm shift for me. It really was. I was so guarded about not letting everyone know who I was. And when the head of the school said, nobody cares that you're gay, it's okay, I had to experience that to really believe it. And they didn't care. And I think that's the first time in my life I've ever experienced that. And they were like, oh. And at that time, I was espousing a Christian belief still. I aspired to stay Christian. And at that point, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's great. God's great. Yeah, you do you, I'll do me, And they were so unbelievably welcoming.
And so today, as you think about where you are, you describe yourself as a hopeful agnostic.
I do.
Tell me about that.
Well, for so long, either through my seminary training or what I was taught in church growing up, I've been told to define God, define Scripture, define your theological beliefs. I no longer feel like defining it, and I haven't felt like defining any of that for years now, 12, 13, 14 years, because for me, giving up having to have a definition for God helps me feel free. There's a liberation with that, because in the past, every time I defined a theology or a God, I had to start defending it. And I don't think God, if there is a God, needs defending, and realizing that was eye-opening for me. And so the hopeful agnostic part, depends on the day. My husband and I attend a church downtown, and it's wonderful. We haven't been in 8 months, but we do love the church. And super progressive people, lots of gay men and women there. And I like the idea of God.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced there is at this point, but it's funny. I had a conversation with an old friend from my seminary days literally 2 weeks ago, and he is desperately trying to convince me to vote for his political candidate. Desperately. And desperately trying to, in his words, pull me from slipping into hell. And he'll say things like, well, how does this view that you have, how do you reconcile that with Scripture? And I'm like, I don't ascribe the same authority to the Bible that you do, so I don't have to reconcile it.
Yeah.
It's a book. It's beautiful. There's incredible stories, and I'm inspired by some of them. I'm not bound by that book. You are, because you are ascribing that authority to it. For me, if God gives you authority and gives you inspiration through the Bible, God gives it to me through nature, through music, through art, through reading, through conversations with friends, through my nieces and nephews, being on top of a mountain when I'm hiking or backpacking. Why can't that be of God too? I think it is.
Yeah.
And I don't know if God is a he, she, they, it, whatever. I don't know if it's a universal consciousness. I do know that even in conversations I've had with you over the years, I feel something pulling on my soul. I can't define what that is. And to me, I think whatever that is, that might be what we're trying to call God.
It's when I think about all the things that you've said over the course of the last few minutes, it's just interesting to hear the evolution, because your story is very unique, and it's unique to you, right? But I think there are things that everyone struggles with that could be part of this same conversation.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you listen to you describe kind of the way you thought about things, and then you had something pull on those thoughts, and you had something challenge those thoughts, and then you made a conscious decision. Like, those are the types of ebbs and flows that we all go through on a number of things that we deal with.
Yeah.
And it's precisely the reason that if you go back and look at your 16-year-old self, there are very few of us that really still think, believe, hope, and exist the way we did when we were 16, because of all of the things that we learn and process as time goes on, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think it's important to because you can learn a lesson just from listening to your story, right? In that you have these pieces that I think all of us can identify with, but yours is a very unique twist, because it is probably in the grand scheme of stories, it is probably one that is the biggest struggle that people kind of face, and you hear about but you never live it. And
Yeah.
you having lived from having to think about a full religious background to maybe this is not for me. I'm looking for a way not to be gay. Let me see if I can get fixed. I mean, those are big struggles, and
Yeah.
I commend you for actually just walking through the story, because a lot of people would not be able to talk through that.
All right.
So you have now become somewhat famous because of all of your book reading, and you have this huge Instagram that is devoted to book reading.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about, like, where did you come up with the idea, and where is it going?
All right. So I said this earlier on. If I'm anything, I'm a big old nerd. I am a nerd, and I'm obsessed with reading, and I read everything. I read everything. And um, my husband had a broken femur 2 years ago, and it was a spiral fracture. So we were housebound. He was non-weight bearing on that leg for a year and a half. We really couldn't go or do anything, and it was tough. It was a tough time, and but it proved to be such a great thing for our marriage. It's pretty amazing, But during that time, of course, I had an Instagram account. I'd scroll, more than I normally did because we couldn't go anywhere. And I started seeing these people doing book reviews,
Oh, okay.
and they called them bookstagrams. And my nerd antenna went up, and I'm like, I want one of those, and started reaching out to people on Instagram and say, hey, how'd you do that? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? You have 200,000 followers. How's that possible? And I started mine last Christmas, and the entire goal is to get free books. That's the only goal. My husband's like, you bought 4 books last week. No more books for the next 2 weeks. And I'm like, you can't do that to me. And so I'm starting to get free books. And I just got 2 free books from Random House Publishing.
Which is awesome.
It's incredible. I got a free book from Isaac Mizrahi, the fashion designer.
Yes.
He follows me.
I have to say, Kate and I were talking about Isaac Mizrahi.
I love him.
Here's the thing. I said, Woody got a follow from Isaac Mizrahi, and I think it's a big deal. And Kay was like, well, that is a big deal. And I was like, yes, because I like to say the name Isaac Mizrahi. And so now I'm going to get to say it very frequently, because I'm going to ask Woody all about Isaac Mizrahi, because you're actually going to meet him, or did you meet him in New York?
We got married in New York, my husband and I, and our favorite restaurant is Il Cantinore. And incredible Italian food. And Isaac and his husband love that restaurant and go there regularly. And I'm like, last year, I was like, oh, we should totally meet there sometime. He goes, that would be awesome. And he didn't say awesome, but, and so, yeah, we're planning on going up, hopefully before Christmas. And I've told Isaac I'd let him know, and we'll get together or something. And yeah, it's funny, because I discovered him on Project Runway. I have 0 artistic ability. I wear the same pair of shorts and blue jeans and cowboy boots. That's all I wear. I have 2 polo shirts, and that's all I wear. I have no fashion sense. But Isaac and I have just communicated for a year now. And he'll send me a meme or something, and I'll send him something, or I'll post some stupid dancing video with me in books, and he'll say how much he liked it, and and he is just such a genuine guy.
I just think that's incredible. But what's more incredible for me is that you set a goal of getting free books, and now the books are arriving.
The books are arriving. I got 2 free books. I probably get about 4 to 5 free books a month. And for me, I got to tell you, man, I'm beyond excited about that. As soon as I get them, I open them. A lot of times I'll film a video of me opening them for my Instagram, and I'm just giddy. And a lot of people that have followed me, they're like, your face is different when you're opening these books. And I'm like, I can't help it. I love it. And I'll take pictures and send them to my husband. He's like, thank God you didn't have to buy them.
So we didn't talk a lot about your time as a principal. But you were principal for how long?
So I was at Carver Elementary for, I think, 6 years.
I forgot about Carver Elementary.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And then I was at Green Elementary for 2.
Okay. And so when you were principal, you're really
Principal Woody.
Yeah, like first of all, for listeners, when you see the title and the name on the episode, it's actually Jonathan Woody, but you go by Woody, which I think is cool, and
it helped with rodeo.
It would certainly help with rodeo. That's awesome. But think about when you were with the kids as principal. You were Principal Woody. You were in charge of the school administration. We'll call that a chapter, right? Because we've been talking about the chapters in your experiences. What was it from that period that you take with you that you feel like you wouldn't have gotten had you not been principal, and it's influenced you from then?
Well, that's a good question. I think what I realized pretty early on, probably within the first couple of weeks, is that, man, a lot of kids have nothing. And I grew up somewhat poor. You know, I remember my parents, when I was in elementary school, were very poor. My mom would like wrap up her stuff to give to people, you know, stuff she already had. And I remember that. I remember a couple Christmases not being able to get anything and being told that we didn't have the money to buy anything. Didn't understand that as a kid. It just seemed unfair. I was an elementary student, you know, but I began as a principal seeing kids whose their nothingness far exceeded the nothingness I thought I had or that I didn't have. And that was eye-opening for me. And it made me think about my time in Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania and the kids that I knew and was working with here who had nothing. Kind of mirrored what I was had seen over there, you know. And what was the difference is the people that I knew who lived in mud hut villages, they didn't have the expectation that they should have anything.
Yeah.
You know, and I used to think, you know, they weren't shackled by the comforts of their couch. You know, they weren't thinking about their next video game. They were just living. Not that I don't want them to have more than that. You know, that's not what I'm saying. But I think what I left being a principal, what has stuck with me is that we need a society that finds ways to take care of those who don't have. And ultimately, it would be great if the church stepped up and did that, but it's not happening. And it wasn't happening in the churches I went to growing up. So the government's got to find a way, in my opinion. It's certainly affected my politics. And I got to say, being a principal, it was so freeing to love a kid without any ulterior motive of getting them saved. Witnessing, sharing my faith with them. You know, the irony is that as a non-Christian, I was so much more loving to people and so much more accepting. And the absence of an ulterior spiritual motive was just liberating.
That's interesting. That is interesting. Because I don't know that I've ever thought about that, right? Like there is some amount of internal pressure that you put on yourself from that perspective, in that if it's your role to teach these people biblically, these kids, then it is up to you, or they don't get it, and we're not talking, they're not going to be able to pass the test. We're talking eternal damnation type things, right? I mean, that's a lot of pressure for an individual to carry. And so to think about that you could love a kid and educate a kid as a human child without that pressure being placed on yourself to do so is amazing.
Yeah. It's liberating.
Yeah. Yeah. So Woody, what's next for you?
Oh gosh, more books. I want books. I want all the books. I only have like 6,400 followers. I want to get to like, if I get to 10,000, I know 2 publishers who are going to give me monthly books. I'm slowly working my way there, and, but my husband and I, we're going to build a house up in Floyd, Virginia, in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And I don't expect we're going to move there anytime soon, full time. I'd love to be there more. I love the mountains. I love camping and hiking, and he does not. So he'll stay back at the house and sip a whiskey and sit in a jacuzzi.
And wait for you to come back.
And wait for me to come home. And it's funny, whenever I do go camping, he's never been. He just doesn't camp. And he always makes me strip in the garage and leave all the clothing there because he says I stink, and then walk straight up. And there's nothing romantic about being naked in a garage smelling.
That is funny because I'm team no camp.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he is too.
So I completely get it. In fact,
you would go camping with me, though, sure. For one night?
I don't know. Like, if there were the appropriate escape measures in place and camping really meant that it was an RV, maybe.
All right. RV's
but
good.
we would have to negotiate these things up front.
For sure.
There would be no surprises for me.
For sure. That's funny.
Well, it has been super fantastic to get to sit and talk with you, because it's been some time for us to catch up too.
For sure.
And even though I knew bits and pieces and maybe even a few chunks of what we discussed, it's just really interesting to hear your perspective from start to finish. And so
I'm blown away you think it's interesting. That's wonderful.
So I tell you what, when the episode comes out, you have to promise to listen to it.
Oh, I will. I've listened to all of them so far.
And really?
I have.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
That's that's amazing.
I think you're far more talented than you know you are. And I'm sure I've told you this. I'll gush on you a little bit.
Oh no.
I adore you. I love you to death, and have thoroughly enjoyed getting to know you the past 15 years, really, 16 years. And I think you are capable of accomplishing anything.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Course, buddy.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
And so we'll have a review of this one once it's out, because I'm anxious to hear what you say about it.
Okay.
Once you actually hear back some of the things that we talked about today.
All right.
Again, thank you so much for spending the time with me, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And so we end another episode. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. I certainly appreciate all your support, so if you enjoyed the content, please like, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends. The more you share, the more opportunities we will have to bring you great guests and their remarkable stories. And if you want to know more about the guests, get background information on previous episodes, or just learn a bit more about me and the show, visit us at uncommonlyremarkable.com. Feel free to leave me a comment or a suggestion, and if you want to be featured on the show, click the Contact Us button. Until next time, stay remarkable.